Hello and welcome to episode number 206, where I'm talking with Mary Thompson about Ayurveda's view on mental health. We talk about how the doshas can affect our mental tendencies. We also discuss the three mental gunas of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas and how to maintain positive mental health. So please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. I will also discuss topics like yoga, which is the sister science of Ayurveda, and various topics under the umbrella of holistic health and planetary health, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature and to Mother Nature. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening, and now here's a new episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today, I'm very happy to welcome back Mary Thompson, who is an experienced educator and a heart-centered mentor to Ayurvedic practitioners. Having taught Ayurveda for over 20 years, she continues to find joy in supporting her students as they step into their professional lives as Ayurvedic health counselors and Ayurvedic practitioners. Through individual mentorship and online continuing education, she maintains a supportive relationship with both new and experienced practitioners. Mary, welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Colette. It's great to be back talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today because we're going to talk about mental health. And the World Health Organization recognizes World Mental Health Day as the 10th of October every year. So that just passed recently. And today in particular, we want to talk about Ayurveda's view on mental health, which I think is really interesting and always good to cover this topic because we focus so much on physical health. And I don't think we give enough attention sometimes to mental health.
I really think that's true. There's so much that we just kind of take for granted. If my body's working fine, that I'm okay.
Yeah. And we're so quick to go see our practitioner or to go get some relief if we're feeling something physically. But when it comes to our mental health, if we're feeling anxious or stressed or having lots of worry or maybe even panic attacks, we're less likely to go seek help for that.
Right. I think we think there's something wrong with us or that we should just be able to buck up and deal with our lives and not have these issues. And I think it's hard because we try to use this disturbed mind to try and fix the disturbed mind. And so everything gets kind of distorted. Exactly.
We're trying to be rational from a place that is aggravated and we can't think clearly. So Mary, I'd like to start with, first of all, Ayurveda's teaching on holistic health and the fact that Ayurveda views that there's no separation between physical and mental health.
Yeah. So Ayurveda has this term, one of the terms that's used for health is called swastha, which is being established in yourself, which means that I'm aware of what's going on with my physical body and I'm willing to take the steps to address that. And then it goes on to the next step and says, and I'm aware of what's going on in my mind and my emotions, and I'm willing to take the steps to address that. And then we could look into going even beyond that into my spiritual life. I'm aware of how I'm connected with myself and my source, and I'm willing to take the steps to correct that if there's an imbalance. So in that, we could see that in order to be healthy, I have to be healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, as well as spiritually.
Right, exactly. And that each affects the other.
Right. I had a student one time that when we talked about Ayurveda views, there's 3 bodies. You've got your physical body, which we're really familiar with. We see it all the time in the mirror and we have issues with it or we love it and whatever we want to do, have that relationship with it. And then we have a second body that's where our mind and emotions live. And if you could imagine, I've got one hand, which would be my physical body, and I take my other hand and just lay it right on top of that. And that's my mind and my emotions. And it's just like every part of my physical body is kind of permeated with my mind and my emotions.
Right.
And if anybody's thinking that's funny, I know that when I had an auto accident, I was angry about something and I had all this pain in my shoulder. I stored all that anger in my shoulder. And for years, I would tell people, oh, yeah, I've got this bad shoulder thing. I had this accident and that's where the seatbelt was. And, and I just blamed it on the physical problem that I had had. But it went on for years. If I sat too long in a chair, my shoulder started to hurt. And I was in counseling and she said, you've got a lot of anger. And it was like, I see myself as really Vata. So it was like anger. I don't even know what anger is. How can I have anger?
Yeah.
And I started to do work around anger and I did all this anger release work. And my shoulder has never bothered me since then.
Wow, that's amazing.
And then but I shouldn't say it's never bothered me because now I recognize when it does start to ache a little bit, if I think about, am I holding anger? Is there something I need to say? Is there something? Now, not everybody's going to have their shoulder hurt them when they're angry. That's mine.
Yes.
But maybe you have the big toe, or maybe you've got your knee that goes out when you get frustrated or anything. So the body and mind take up the same space and we store stuff wherever we're going to store it. If I tried, and I did try lots of times to try and fix my shoulder physically, physical therapy and getting massages and doing herbs and doing everything I could to fix my physical shoulder, and nothing helped.
Right.
One session with pounding my fists on a pillow and crying, and it was like, oh, that feels a lot better.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? And like you said, we can all store emotions in our tissues, but it could be different areas for each of us.
Right. The definition that Ayurveda uses for health, and I'm not going to do it in Sanskrit because you'll hear my accent and you'll go, oh my gosh, so terrible. But it talks about having balanced doshas and having balanced tissues of the body, having appropriate levels of tissue in the body, having all the organ systems working well, good digestion, good elimination, all this. And so it's pretty much, that's where we go with the Western view of health. You got physical health, you've got symptom free. But it ends with a happy and contented state of mind.
Yeah.
That without that happy, contented state of mind, I don't really have optimal health. I have physical health, but I don't have optimal health.
Right, exactly. And so there needs to be, for optimal health, there needs to be holistically, the body, mind, soul needs to be in a good place.
Right. I think of this, sometimes I'll define this as like mental health is being able to be in the present moment, not being completely invested in the past and not kind of fantasizing my future or dreading my future, that I'm here and able to be in this moment with you and not concerned about every other moment. So my focus is here. So I look at that as a sign of kind of mental health.
Yes.
And then you can look emotionally, that I'm able to be appropriate emotional response to this moment and not get caught up in, I'm still so angry about this thing that happened to me in the past that I'm going to blast anger at you.
So true. And that reminds me of course, the doshas and the mental tendency of the doshas when you say that. And that's what I'd love to talk about next, that of course we all know Ayurveda tells us that we each have different ratios of the 3 doshas of Vata, Pitta, Kapha, making up our physical and constitution. But these doshas do influence our mental tendencies.
Oh, they certainly do. I always think of the dosha like a template. It's what we came in kind of to learn. Is if I came in with a Vata body, I'm here to learn, how do you manage this Vata body? How do I get enough rest? How do I take care of it? How do I kind of contain my energy? And at the level of the mind, it has a default. I always think of this like with computers. You've got the default program is the one it came with, and it's going to run with that unless you do something to switch it.
Right.
And so I think of Vata's default in the mind is to go into that fear, worry, anxiety. kind of, maybe I feel shame about my past or embarrassment about my past. So if I think about the past, I bring up things that make me feel uncomfortable and kind of afraid that I might step into that again, or I might recreate these scenarios. Then I project to the future. And if I'm in a good space, I fantasize these wonderful things that are going to happen for me, kind of fantastical, amazing things. And if I'm in a bad place, then I imagine, I always end with it, that I'm going to end up dying alone in a ditch. It's like Vata carries it out to its extreme.
Exactly. Worst case scenario.
Right. And it's never just something like, oh, and then I'm really going to have to struggle for a little while. It's always, no one's going to help me. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm going to be bereft.
Yes. Yeah.
And I see this as kind of what the dosha does. That's the template that the mind has when we're on default. So, and the default is when I haven't made any choices to kind of correct the direction that I'm going. So my computer came with a default to use Windows, and I decide I want something better than that.
Right.
And so I have to do some work to download that and make that. So Vata dosha has that tendency to go to worry, fear, anxiety when it's all just left to its own devices. So I always ask people if I'm trying to figure out what's keeping them up at night, whether it's Vata, Pitta, probably not Kapha.
Yes.
It's keeping them up. But I'll ask them, like, where's your mind going? What are you thinking about? And they'll, if it's more of a anxiety, not sure about something, or trying to, I don't know. I always look at this creating problems where if I'm awake at 3 a.m, I've got something dire going on in my body, like a cramp in my leg has become some kind of rare tumor that I'm going to have addressed, or that indigestion has become stomach cancer. That's the worst case scenario thing. And then miraculously by 6 a.m, all those conditions have resolved themselves. And so it goes there. Pitta dosha has that tendency to go into anger, resentment, frustration, control. That's their default. That's what they're going to do if they don't take the steps to pacify Pitta. So if they go back to the past, if they're thinking about the past and having that conform the present, they remember betrayals. They remember things that have made them angry in the past. And sometimes if they're in their worst state of mind, they're going to think, how can I get even? How can I get back?
Right. Revenge.
And, And if I go into the future, then it's going to be about plans, and that's going to be what pulls the pitted mind out of the present moment is, what do they have to do? How are they going to succeed? What are their goals? And so they can't really be here because they're so busy working on that next thing.
Exactly. Yeah. The mind has the tendency to hold on to things, a hard time letting go, right? Like you're saying, that frustration, and that maybe it could lead to revenge. And then the competitiveness and the ambition can lead to the intensity in the mind and the drive.
Right. And I think the part about having the dosha is that's kind of their template. Right. That's what they come in with. So we see these Pitta people, and that's what they do. And when we're in that space of being the default, or kind of the unconscious state, we can't really imagine that anybody thinks any way differently than we do.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because this is the way my mind goes, so yours must do it as well.
Yeah.
And then Kapha dosha goes into kind of a sadness, a melancholy, an unnamed grief, I often call it. They don't really know why they feel sad, but they kind of feel sad. And so then they're going to be looking at the world through this lens of ennui, angst. And as they do this, like, they're really caught up in the past. And so they're going to be thinking the past was so much better. So that idea of looking through rose-colored glasses and seeing things, they romanticize the past, and they'll hang on to things that have meaning for them. If you enter their home and you say, oh, this is a lovely table, they go, yes, it was my grandmother's. Yes. And it's going to be in my family forever. And, oh, this is really lovely. Yes, my aunt owned that. She gave it to me when I was 13. And there's a whole story behind it, because Kapha is all about relationship and forming that bond. But we know sometimes it can be hard to move into the present moment because I've still got the weight of the past here with me. So we look at the doshas influencing our mental tendencies, that they're going to kind of be the pattern by which we look at the world when we remain unconscious.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they all have, there's positive aspects to this. It's just like you said, this is the default system, but now we need to make sure that we pacify the doshas so that we can have good mental health, have a good outlook, have good perceptions and thoughts and emotions. And we'll definitely come to more about that later when we talk about how do we maintain good mental health. And before we go there, I want to talk about the fact that Ayurveda teaches us that there are 3 gunas also that influence our mental health, and they are Rajas, Sattva, and Tamas. So can you explain these 3 qualities and their functions as well, please, Mary?
I can. Let's see if I can do it compactly.
Okay, I know. It's a big question.
So one thing we can think about is sattva might be our best expression of ourself, where we're not really tied to the doshas, the vata tendencies. So if I had that default, which is going to be more rajasic, my rajas is going to be more of who I am when I'm not taking steps to be better,
Right.
I guess, for lack of a better term for it. So I always think of I'm going to start with sattva, because I think of that sattvic mind as very proactive. That this is where mindfulness is going to come, where I'm aware of who I am. I'm aware of my tendencies, and I'm willing to take steps to mitigate those tendencies when I need to, and to support them when that's appropriate. I had a big aha moment with sattva. This was a number of years ago. I had no idea it was sattva. I was in college, and I hadn't yet been introduced to these terms. But I had a teacher I was in a speed reading course, and he gave us an assignment to read a short story, and he said, okay, well, here's a short story. Go ahead and read the story. When you're done, raise your hand. Okay, everybody go. So in a minute, half the hands go up. In 2 minutes, the other half go up. By 3 minutes, everybody is done. And he looks up and he goes, well, you've all failed. And we were all going, but we read so quickly. We did such good jobs. We read so fast. They said, this is a short story. He goes, you use speed reading for facts. You use speed reading for your textbooks. Maybe you use speed reading for the newspaper. But a short story, a poem, these are to be savored.
Very good.
And years later, when I heard the term sattva, one thing I want to say is what stuns me about that story is here it is now. It's been, I should mumble, 40 years since that happened, since I was there in that classroom. And I still remember the impact of him saying, I failed.
Yeah.
that I didn't do the right thing because I was on default.
Right.
The default was, I'm in a speed reading class, I'm going to speed read. And when I moved it into consciousness and looked proactively at what is this that's getting my time and attention? Does it deserve more time and attention, or does it deserve less time and attention?
Right.
And when I think of sattva, this is where I kind of go, is I think being able to look at a situation and determining what is my best mental, physical, emotional response to this situation.
Yeah.
So if I have something that generates fear, then fear is an appropriate response. But as Vata, I get so caught up in the what if, which means there's nothing to worry about right now, but what if my car gets a flat tire? What if I get a sudden bill? Do I have the money for it? And suddenly I'm on the road worrying and fretting when I don't have to be.
Right.
So in that sattvic state, this is where the mind is aware of what's coming and has all the tools in the toolkit. So I look at dosha qualities sometimes as tools in a toolkit, where Vata has creativity and flexibility and adaptability. And so am I able to use that, or am I stuck in the box?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And Pitta has that toolkit of vision, analytical thinking, ability to see what needs to be done, and leadership to see that it happens. And sometimes they want to sit back, so sometimes it's like, oh, is leadership needed here? Maybe you're playing with a baby and the baby's trying to stand up. You don't sit here and go, oh, come on, you can do better than that. We let the baby do its thing because that's appropriate in that moment. And then the Kapha dosha is more about kind of holding back unconditional love, support, relationship. And so sometimes there's that pulling back and saying, okay, maybe don't want everyone to pull back fully from unconditional love, but when they're in their sattvic tendency, they're going to maximize those tools. They're going to be able to use that. I can be creative and loving and supportive and a leader all at once, because in sattva, I'm not bound by the default.
Yes. Yeah. Like you said, in sattva is this access to consciousness in the moment and being able to choose the appropriate reaction rather than going into, like you said, your default mode.
Right. And so if we thought of the brain, it's kind of like what we do in the cerebral cortex. The outer part of the brain is where our thinking goes on. Inner part of the brain, what sometimes they call the reptilian brain, or in that limbic brain, this is where our default is. Yeah. And when I'm calm, when I'm not under stress, then experiences, information comes up, goes right out to the cerebral cortex, and I can think about it. I can decide, how do I want to respond? How am I going to address this? What am I going to do about this? In the limbic brain, or in that older part of the brain, the reptilian brain, it's immediate response. If I'm Vata, I'm going to run away from it. Yeah. And if I'm Pitta, I'm going to fight it. And if I'm Kapha, I'm going to see what I can do to help it. One of my friends calls this fawning, the flight, fight, and fawn, where you're just kind of winning people over. And so in the sattvic state, we are able to stay in calm, clear thinking, present moment focus, proactive, able to see what needs to be done, and willing to take the steps that are necessary to do it. Does it sound lovely?
It does. It just sounds very, very balanced, peaceful, expansive, full of wisdom.
Yeah. And so, for everybody who's kind of going, well, I'm not really very much like that. It's like a bell curve. There's very few people who are always in sattva. Right. This is our goal.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like you'd say that when you're in the flow, in the highest aspect of yourself, you'd be possibly in the sattvic mind state.
Yeah, that's a good goal to aim for. And like you said, it's not going to be something that you stay in all the time, unless you're truly enlightened. But right. That's our goal, that we will have that balance and awareness in the moment.
Right. And so when we don't do that, we're probably in a rajasic state. And this could be, if you remember the bell curve from college doing the grading, there's maybe 10% is there in the sattva and 10% maybe all the way down in tamas. But the bulk of that bell, about 80% of the bell, is in a rajasic state. And that's where most of us kind of live. And it's the default mode. It's when I live in alignment with my tendencies rather than kind of considering, is that the best way for me to respond? So if sattva was proactive, the rajasic mind is reactive. Yeah. Something comes in and I respond. So when I'm in that rajasic mind state, Vata, Pitta, Kapha are going to go to their default emotions. So I often think in this rajasic state, Vata brings the fear into the room. When they come into the room, even before they get into the room, they may feel anxious about what room they're walking into. They may walk in and start looking around, and they may not consciously think this, but they're thinking of, what in this room could harm me? What do I need to be afraid of here? In what way could I embarrass myself? And so this is kind of the heart, because everybody worries, and we always say Vatas are the worriers, but everybody worries. But Vata worries, did I choose the right outfit? Do my socks match? Right. Am I going to be able to drive myself out of here? Can I extricate myself from this situation? They're just worried about everything, whereas Pitta is going to worry more about situational. Time, money, health. If there's a problem, then they're going to worry. If there's not a problem, they're not going to worry. Right. And Kapha dosha tends to worry more about big ticket worries, and they worry about other people more so than themselves. So they're going to be caught up in that. So everybody worries, but Vata tends to live by worry. They might identify themselves as a warrior. So in that rajasic state, they're just reacting. Is I see this pencil and I worry, oh my gosh, it's getting short. I mean, I need a new pencil soon. Where are my pencils? Did I lose my pencils? And all of a sudden, I'm not in this moment anymore because I'm busy looking for a pencil. Yeah. that I don't need, but I just happen to trigger it. So it's reactive that way. And the Pitta in Rajas, again, being reactive, they walk into the room, whatever room it is, and they're already a little annoyed. I had someone tell me one time they had a teacher, like a guru, who always worked from this point, that he would walk into the room and you could see him looking for the thing he was going to be angry about.
Oh, dear.
And she said, so he would walk in, and it was his teaching method, I guess, but he would walk in and he would look around the room and, until he found the stray hair or he found the bit of fluff that was out of place. And then it was like, nobody cleaned this room and you're you're all so bad. But Pitta has that tendency that, in the Rajasic mind state, there is a bit of a belief in Pitta that they're the only one who can fix the world's problems.
Yeah.
And so when you have that mind state, you've got to always be on high alert. It's kind of like a watchdog, right?
Right.
Something's going to come in, so I better be here staring at the door just in case when it does, I'm ready.
Right. I'm in control of the situation.
And so they're always looking at things through that critical, judgmental kind of lens, because at any moment they may be called to action.
Sure.
So I always think of in that Rajasic mind state, reactive, everybody gets angry. Vatas tend to get irritated. They tend to get little things that might annoy them, or, I can't believe that's happening, but they don't get really blowout anger. Or if they do, they blow up and then they forget about it.
Yeah.
They couldn't tell you tomorrow what they got angry about yesterday. And Pitta tends to be leading with anger. So they get angry over, everything, that little bit of fluff on the floor. But Kapha dosha tends to get angry if there's a threat to a loved one. If you go up to a Kapha person, you call them a name, they go, boy, you're having a bad day. You call their kid a name, you better get out of the way.
Right. Very protective. Yeah.
And so in that Rajasic state, we go emotional. And we may be hyper-reactive. We're not thinking, is this the best way for me to respond? But we're still in that reactive mode. And we tend to go by our default more so than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is, of course, benefits. We need this Rajasic energy, right? This Rajasic quality throughout our lives, because it gives us that spark of initiative.
Right.
In our life.
Exactly. Because without it, if we were all sattvic, then we would just really be more receptive and not really interactive. We'd be waiting if the world came up to us and it presented some way, we would react to it, or we'd respond to it actually in a way that was appropriate, but we're not going to go out and seek. The sattvic mind doesn't feel a need to seek, where the Rajasic mind is more of the seeker.
Yeah, it's more inspirational, right? Like I think of it as that spark, that little spark of fire, creating initiative and action.
Right. So, and we need something. When we're reactive, we need something to be reacting to. There's stimulus reaction. And then there's the Kapha dosha in Rajas, and we've mentioned them a few times, that they're going to have a tendency to pull back.
Right.
That they want to kind of take care of themselves, take care of their families, their relationships, but they don't really feel that need to go out and push themselves into situations. So Kapha in a Rajasic state becomes more default Kapha. They become a little bit more quiet, a little bit more introspective. And the difference here between the Sattvic Kapha and the Rajasic Kapha is the Sattvic Kapha has the option. They choose to be sedate when sedation is important, and they choose to be active when activity is needed. And in the Rajasic mind, they don't see a time when action is really needed. That I'm more caught up in, why worry? If it's not broken, why fix it? Okay. And Pitta's in the mindset of it could always be improved.
Yes.
And
I'm going to fix it.
Right. And Vata's more like, I was nowhere near that when it broke. It doesn't have anything to do with me. Don't blame me for this. I've got too much going on right now. I can't deal with that.
Yeah.
So I think the Rajasic Kapha is a hard one for us to wrap our minds around, because it's just Kapha being Kapha and being the default Kapha. So their reaction is going to be melancholy, to go into the past. I always make a little joke, there's the old Vata Pitta Kapha walk into a bar, but in this case, I should say Vata Pitta Kapha walk into a yoga studio.
There you go.
And someone comes up and calls them a name. I don't know why they would do that. Maybe they're walking down a street And so they're walking down the street and they're in their town and someone comes up to them and calls them a name. Now the Vata is going to take from that fear. The Rajasic Vata is going to be afraid. Oh my gosh, I can't even go out in the street anymore. There's people attacking me. And what did I do wrong? I didn't do anything. Why did that person come up to me? And they get caught up in the fear and the anxiety about the situation. The Pitta, in reaction, says, this is ridiculous. That person has no right to come up to me and call me a name. I don't know who they think they are. This is my town. And I'm going to start a petition to get this person run out of town or to make sure that nobody can do these things. There needs to be change. Maybe I need to run for public office. And the Kapha dosha person is more likely to go, all of these are in Rajas, definitely. But the Kapha nature person is more likely to go, this used to be such a nice place to live. Never in my life did people come up and call me names in the street. It just wouldn't happen. But now there's so many strangers moving in. And they don't just have our same sentiments. And so we have to, maybe it's just not safe for me to go out anymore. Maybe I just need to go back and be around the people that I know and trust and not really open up to these new different people who are name calling. So each one goes through a situation, and we're like this very much, that we go through a situation and we respond based on our history, not necessarily based on the present moment, because in Sattva, we would look at the situation and we could say, oh, this person's has something going on. Is there something I can help you with?
Right. More contextual.
Is there a problem?
Yes.
Right. Do you need something? Because you calling me a name doesn't make any sense to me. And if they're still combative, I can take care of myself without having me carry a lot of emotion around beyond that.
Yeah.
So I think with the Rajasic mind state, it's the reactive one where something happens and I respond. And when I'm in Rajas, I respond from that default response. Oh, and I did my Vata Pitta Kapha with the reactive quality. So Kapha tends to be more pulled back. And I guess everybody gets melancholy is I guess where I should go with it. Because we did everybody worries, everybody gets angry, and everybody gets sad. And Vatas and Pittas tend to get sad situationally.
Yeah.
Vatas certainly, when they get sad, they look for something to distract them from it a little bit. They might change jobs, change relationships, or go shopping. When Pitta gets sad, they look for some way to fix it. How can I repair this thing that's making me sad? And Kapha tends to have a really hard time. They get stuck in it. They get mired in it.
Yeah.
And it becomes the lens that they're looking at the world through.
Right. Yeah, they really wallow in it. Yeah. That's a good insight into Rajas, and thank you very much for that. And so now I'd love to talk about Tamas.
Tamas. If Sattva is the best aspect of ourselves, and Rajas is kind of the default aspect of ourselves, Tamas would be when we really lead with our worst tendencies. So at the beginning, I talked about like Sattva comes from a proactive state of mind where I'm aware of what's coming up and how I can address it and what's going on. And Rajas comes from this reactive state of mind where this happened, I responded, I'm actually out in the world and I'm having a relationship or I'm having an interaction with the world. The world shows me stimulus and I give them response. In a tamasic state of mind, you can almost think of it as an inactive state of mind, and not completely inactive. That for Vata dosha, for example, those fears have become now the only focus that I have, and it's all I can think about is these fears. And all I can think about is these embarrassments or this shame or these problems that I have. And my response is going to be that, everything looks so negative. And so the Vata kind of maximizes the fear to the point that they can't relate to the other emotions. They can only kind of respond from this fear-based state. And I often think in a tamasic mind state, especially a Vata tamasic mind state, when I'm in that place, I want to escape. Right. I want to get away from it as much as I can. It's all I can think about, and all I want to do is run away. But I don't know if you've had this experience. I certainly have when I've had high anxiety about, say, something I was working on. It wasn't going the way I wanted. I was going to disappoint people. And I could get to the place where I'm, in my room, covers over my head, just kind of staring. I'm doing nothing to resolve the problem.
Yeah, you're frozen almost.
I'm just frozen in the anxiety of it. And that's when that tamasic mind state is there So everything becomes one more stressor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the mind being inactive, meaning it's only responding to one motivator. Everything else is not finding its way in. And this, I think we could look into situations like trauma responses and
I was just thinking
PTSD.
that. Yeah. Like if you're saying that Rajas is more the reactive, the fight or flight, whereas then Tamas, just from the explanation that you gave, makes me think of that freeze mode.
Right, that I'm here, and now I could be, the mind is in freeze mode, but the body and the responses may still be very active. So Vata may still be running around doing stuff. They're keeping themselves really busy. They're keeping themselves really distracted. Maybe, I'm thinking of my mom right now, that maybe it's a defense mechanism so that I don't have to react to this moment because, oh my gosh, I don't even have a moment to be here. I'm already busy going off somewhere else, and so I can't be caught up. My anxiety is driving me so fast that I can't step into the present moment to have a reaction. It's only going to be my tamasic response.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And this can become the place where we do self-harm. What's the ultimate means of escape could be escaping through addiction or escaping through self-harm. And that can be, so tamas is the place where we have mental illness.
Right.
Like I would say most of us are in rajas, and we can be uncomfortable with this. And we certainly could improve our state of mind, but we're not in mental disease.
Yes.
And when we move into tamas, we're in a mental disease state where we're no longer aware of the fact that we are creating this environment. Yeah. We think the world is like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, if you're not afraid, are you, how is that possible that you're not terrified of all these things? And then Pitta in tamas is going to go to the anger end. And we know when anger gets blown out, then we go into revenge, rage, vindication, the things somebody must pay.
Yeah.
And so this mind in tamas is stuck on that track of maybe there's some horrendous betrayals in the past. And so all I can see is, how can I get back at this situation? I think extreme examples like the Unabomber.
Yeah.
That when you look at his story, he was severely mistreated in college, and it twisted to the point that it was expanded then where the mind became inactive. It projected the damage that was done to him in college onto all colleges. Create this damage.
Yeah.
And so in his minds, in his world, he was trying to raise awareness of the fact that they were harming children. They were harming young adults.
Right.
And so this, in the tamasic mind state, the only point of focus is the thing that I am angry about. And this is where those manifestos come from. Thousands of pages about the anger.
Right. And not thinking of the knock-on effect on everything else, but they're just so consumed by that.
Right. And so the end result of the tamasic mind state here for Pitta dosha is often harming other.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the person you're angry at. It's some object that you now have infused with the qualities. So it's not like he was angry at some particular people who harmed him when he was in college, but he extrapolated that to people who taught at a college he might have attended, or someone he read an article about, that pretty soon it could be anybody could be the target for the anger.
Yeah, you're almost blinded by rage.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a great way of looking at it, because in the tamasic mind state, we are blinded. We can't see present moment. The only thing we can see is that which is driving us to tamas.
Yeah.
And then kapha tamas is going to be that extreme of kapha where they went into kind of an inertic state in rajas, kind of slowing down and attaching to the past. And in that tamasic state, they almost go full stop. No engagement with the world. They might even go within. The people I've known in kapha tamas, we don't see them too much in the world because they just keep their own counsel, or they only trust a very small circle. And they may start hoarding, but if they're hoarding, it's stuff that has meaning for them.
Yeah.
And so it's that some people talk about greed or hoarding, but I often think kapha just becomes almost like a black hole that things are sucked into.
Yeah.
In this kapha tamas.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to jump in here because if you would like more support around maintaining positive mental health, education around the mental tendencies, the gunas of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, you may be interested in checking out my 28-day online, self-paced daily habits for holistic health program. In this program, I talk a lot about the mental gunas or qualities and how to maintain balance mentally and physically. We talk a lot about aligning with the daily energy cycles, the circadian rhythms as well. So you keep your doshas in balance so that they have a positive impact on your mental health as well. I talk about becoming your own healer. We cover the foundations of Ayurvedic healing, and also connecting to your true nature, to your intuition, which can be a guide for you in living a positive and fulfilling life. So if you're interested, just click on the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and check out the programs tab where you can access this 28-day online self-paced course. Okay, let's go back to my conversation with Mary. Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for those explanations. And unlike the physical prakruti, where we have a birth constitution and then we have our vikruti, our current imbalance, the doshas influence the mind, but we don't have a mental constitution as such, but we have these mental imbalances that can occur from an excess of rajas or tamas.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the sattvic mind state, we're very aware of what's my mind state. Mm-hmm. And we're very aware of what we could do about it. So I, catch myself, oh my gosh, I just got so angry over nothing. What's going on with me?
Yeah.
And so in the rajasic mind state, I get angry over something and I think, why did you do that?
Outward blame. Yeah.
Right. But in the sattva, it always comes back to this concept of truth about why am I reacting like that? Oh, I haven't really been sleeping very well and I probably need better sleep. Or I probably had a little bit too much to drink, or maybe I'm not eating the right foods, or, I begin to reflect and think of how could I adapt? How could I change? So in sattva, we're always cultivating health.
Yes. Yeah.
We're aware of the fact if we stepped out of the circle, if we stepped there. In rajas, we're default. So I think of Vata dosha, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I've got too much stuff to do. And so then when they're reacting in fear, they don't stop and think, how did I create that fear? I'm reacting. So I think the fear must be an appropriate response.
Right. Very impulsive.
Or if I'm angry, like if a Pitta in Rajas is angry, it's because, you deserved it. That you did something that made them angry in their mind. They never stop and reflect that they should have probably not had such spicy food at lunch. Right. Or maybe that they work too hard. They're too consumed with their work and their goals. And they don't think about the fact that their mind is somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to expand on that now, Mary. How does it occur that we have an excess of rajas or tamas? We know the goal is to move towards sattva. So how does this happen in our mind? How does these qualities increase in our mind?
Well, you think it's the rajas is the default. So that's kind of what we come in with. Okay. And as long as we remain unaware, as long as I don't stop to think about what my role is in my world, as far as how big a role did I play in the reactions that I'm having, then I'm just going to stay in rajas. And then from an Ayurvedic perspective, there are foods that generate rajas, tend to be stimulants. They're going to keep me really uplifted and reactive, and be uplifted in a sensory sense, not so much a mental emotional sense.
Yes.
But I'm going to be more reactive. I'm going to be sharper. So I have that cup of coffee and I get jittery, and now I'm going to maximize my rajasic response. So if I go to fear, I'm going to go a little bit more anxious, a little bit more fearful. If I go to anger, I'm a little bit more angry, a little bit more irritable. And if I go to kind of sedation, if I go to being still, then the stimulant might actually help me to be clear about what's going on.
Right. So if we think about our world today, it is quite stimulating in every sense.
Oh my gosh. Every sense.
Yeah.
Oh, so much. I always think it's funny. Like I look at some place like Seattle, if you're familiar with the US, and Seattle is cold and damp and heavy energy. And so that's where Starbucks and Peet's Coffee originated, because it's an offset. They're working opposite that quality. And then they get big and they have to move into cities like in Los Angeles and New York and San Francisco and all over the world where there's lots and lots of energy. And so we probably don't need the black coffee so much, because that's just got the stimulant. So now we've got to put milk in it. We got to put sugar in it. We got to put all kinds of things in it in order to kind of allow myself to stimulate myself without creating too much distress in my body. And so I think our world's really, really stimulating. We've got stimulants are the number one products we sell. Yeah. Even now, you and I are talking on a computer, and I'm going to be on this for a few hours today, and it's just going to be more stimulation.
Right. So it's managing all that, knowing that our world, the default of our world right now is stimulation, and it's increasing Rajas. It's how do we balance that out? And before we go talk about balancing things, then Tamas, how is Tamas becoming exaggerated?
Yeah. Well, the more, it's kind of like, the expression that comes to mind for me is someone said, the longer you sit in a barber chair, the sooner you're going to get a haircut. It's like the idea that the more time I spend cultivating tamasic mindset, the sooner I'm going to be moving myself fully into tamas. So when I picture that bell curve with sattva at one end and tamas at another, and rajas is in the middle, rajas is active. So rajas is always moving. If I'm cultivating sattvic things, such as time in nature, kind of time in silence, time in introspection, speaking with other people whose opinions I really respect, and opening my mind to new and different ways of thinking, the more I spend in cultivating sattvic behaviors, the more sattva I will express. The other end of it, the more time I spend cultivating tamasic behaviors or cultivating tamasic mindset, the sooner I'm going to move towards tamas. And so I look at the opposite. These tamasic behaviors would be when I'm eating food that's not healthy for me. Right. And that could be old food, fast foods, junk foods, things like this. Or if I'm actively cultivating things that numb my mind and my senses, like alcohol or drugs, these could move me more towards tamas. Yeah. But think about people. So in sattva, I wanted to cultivate those people who are kind of light and kind of would open my mind. In tamasic, I just want to talk to people that hold the same opinions I hold, so I can kind of double down on those opinions. And the more I do that, the less I see that my opinion is negative. Because I have all these other voices that are telling me that my hatred is correct, or my fear is correct, or my sadness, my depression is the correct way to be. Right. And so then I cultivate my fear, my anger, my sadness. And so that's all I look at. So when I walk into a room, all I look for is, what can I be afraid of here? Who could I talk to? I become a little bit obsessed with finding my fear out in the world, because it validates my reality. Right. And it validates. So if I'm looking for my anger, why am I angry? Look at this newspaper. I've got all these things I could be angry about. But you could look and say, I could read that same article and I may walk away crying out of sadness. Yeah. And you may be angry, and someone else may go into anxiety and fear around it. So I guess the easy answer is, the more often I cultivate clarity and consciousness and mindfulness, the more I move towards sattva and mental health. Right, exactly. And the more I cultivate kind of a lack of mindfulness, a lack of clarity, and a lack of consciousness, the more I move towards tamas. And rajas is the movement between those. Yes. And so let's talk a little bit about the steps towards this cultivating consciousness and mindfulness. What are some things that we can do? And Ayurveda gives us a whole manual on this, about how to live, to cultivate sattva. So one thing would be to look at your diet and to see, is my food really cultivating health in my physical body? Because if it cultivates health in the physical body, it is likely to cultivate health in the mental body as well. If I have a lot of processed foods, sugary foods, old foods, foods that don't have a lot of nutritional value to them, then I'm going to have a harder time maintaining my mental health. because we don't see the split between the physical and the mental.
Yes.
So food, the approach to food and looking for foods that feed your soul can be really important. We look at some things like taking a moment between stimulus and response. That's cultivating sattva, when you take that moment and think, how do I choose to respond? So I think of sometimes when I was in school, when I was teaching, and this break would come for lunch, everyone would say, okay, where do we want to go for lunch? And I thought, if I pause in that sentence and say, what does my body mind need? What would help me to feel more balanced? Just that little gap where you get to make a choice moves you towards sattva, because it moves you towards mindfulness.
Right, exactly.
So that could be another thing that people do. When we look at cultivating sattva, spending time in nature. Nature is very sattvic. It just is. It just exists. And sometimes there can be a lot of, crazy violence. We had a big wind here the other day, and branches were broken and lots of loud tumult going on. And other times it's very still. But taking the time to experience yourself as part of nature.
Right.
That we're impacted by this. I used to work with children, and on windy days, you could just see my staff just come in and go, oh, I really don't like windy days, because you could see how kids were so reactive to it, and they'd be bouncing off the walls.
Yes, yeah.
And it just was really wild to see what kind of impact nature can have on us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that helps us to move into this seeing both sides of what's going on. Nature's not always calm, and it's not always violent. It's always, it's in a state of flux, and it's in that state of movement, and appropriate for what's going on.
Absolutely.
Even if we as humans may not like it too much.
Yes, indeed.
So there's that, the self-care practices that we do in Ayurveda. Physical self-care is mental self-care. So when we take the time to show up for ourselves and to, take care of the 5 senses in the morning, or check in the afternoon. I always have recommend with daily routines that we have this afternoon routine of checking in and saying, have I been really active today? How can I be calm right now? What can I do to cultivate calm? And maybe that's meditation. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's journaling. It could be anything, but cultivating the opposite of what I've been doing all day.
Sure.
And if I've been pretty still all day, what can I do now that's going to get prana moving? So it's again getting into that space of awareness, being established in my physical, mental self, and saying, how can I cultivate this relationship so that I'm responding appropriately in this moment, and I'm creating balance through all this. Yes,
absolutely. Such good points.
So I think when I look at Ayurvedic psychology, it's always cultivate sattva. It's always looking at how can I cultivate more sattva? How can I bring more calm and balance into my life?
Yeah. And I also think, and you mentioned this a moment ago, Mary, too, is relationships. Not only the relationship with yourself, but the relationship with your community, how you are in your community. Are you an active participant? Are you involved in your community? Are you spreading goodwill? And also, I think the relationship with your own faith, whatever that may be, be it, that you find your faith and your grounding in nature or in a religion, or if you're spiritual, whatever that might be, I think those relationships are really important as well.
Yes, I think it is. And it's really just being reflective or considering what's going on instead of just being reactive.
Exactly. Yes, having an overall awareness about how you are in the world, in your life, and how you're using your senses daily.
Yes. So the cultivation of mental health really does involve, taking in good food, getting out in the sunshine, getting some form of exercise, get the prana moving, doing some self-care. And I know for anybody who's listening and has issues with mental health, these can be really, really hard to do, especially to get started, because it seems so monumental. So just showing up for yourself in a small way, if that's all you can do.
Right.
Exactly. What's one thing you could do, and recognize that can be enough for a day. It's like really being gentle with yourself, but always showing up for yourself. If you were your best friend, how would you treat yourself? How would you want to be addressed? How would you want to be loved? Because I think sometimes in our minds, we have a very negative voice that is highly critical, that if somebody came up to us and was speaking maybe to a friend or was speaking maybe to a child and using the same language we use inside our own minds about self-criticism, we'd be very upset with them.
Yeah. There can be some very harsh self-talk going on, and we really need to be mindful of that. And I think as well, if you're in a place where you know you need support, I think that's really important to get some professional help. And just like you would go to a practitioner if your physical health was poor, that if you know that you're having some mental health issues, concerns, that you reach out and get some support and a professional to guide you through that. Because as you said, Mary, it can be really hard when you're in it. It can even be hard to figure a way out or figure what is the next best step. So I do think getting support from a professional is really important then.
Yeah. See, and usually we'll do that when we're in that Rajasic mind state. In Tamasic mind state, it's a little bit more difficult because the Tamasic mind is unaware of itself.
Yes, yeah.
It thinks that we're the crazy ones, right? Because we're not anxious 100% of the time, or we're not angry 100% of the time, or we're actually out there engaging in the present moment and letting go of the past. And so it can be more difficult from that standpoint. But the Rajasic mind state is certainly able to look at itself. And it's one of the reasons why the Rajasic mind state is unhappy, is because it knows that it could be calmer. It knows it could be better. And it also knows it's not.
Yes, there is some of that awareness there. It's not aware all the time because it's more reactionary, but there is some awareness there in moments, usually after the reaction.
Right. Like, oh, I did it again.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like reaching out. And I think that's really good that you said, reach out professionals and talk to someone trusted and loved.
Yeah. But yes, it's so true. The Tamasic mindset really just reinforces itself, that it almost needs somebody externally to help to pull them out of that mud that's dragging them down.
Yeah. And that can be tricky too.
So if you know somebody in that state in your life, is just being there until you see an opening where you can talk to them, but just being there as a support could be.
Yeah. And then, I always just say, be a shining example of better choices.
There you go. Yes, exactly.
And then because eventually they will look at you and say, what are you doing differently? How could you be this calm? You say, oh, well, I listened to this podcast. Right.
Yeah, it's true. Being a good example. Yes. And I often say that you can't convince people to change when they're not ready or they're not in that mindset, but you can be a really good example of what it feels like to be in a balanced state physically and emotionally and mentally. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Mary, thank you so much. A great conversation. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you sharing all this information. I think it's really important information, especially at this time. And I'd love for you, Mary, before we go, is to tell us where we can find out more about you and your offerings, please.
Okay. Well, you can find me at marythompsonayurveda.com. And right now for offerings, I don't have too many. I'm working on a podcast, actually.
Very good.
My brother and I are doing one, and we're calling it Ayur What Now?
Oh,
and it's basically Ayurveda explained. And so we take I feel it's a little bit maybe too schooly, but it's been fun we haven't released it yet, so it's not published yet, but watch out for it. You'll find it on that. We're just in like 10 episodes in and going through the elements of I don't want to say going through the elements of Ayurveda because I just saw that's your podcast, but going through the principles of Ayurveda one at a time, kind of building on it for trying to limit as much of the Sanskrit as possible and introduce the principles to people who are mainstream America. Excellent.
I love it. Well, congratulations. We need more,
thank you.
More of this, spreading this Ayurveda out in the world. The more, the better. Right?
Yeah.
Well, Mary, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and you're always welcome back here. You know that. It's always so insightful to talk to you. You have so much to share, and I appreciate you spending your time here with us, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you so much, Colette. It's really been a pleasure.
Okay. Take good care of yourself, and good luck with the podcast. I'll be looking out for it.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope that you found this conversation informative, and if you think that it would be helpful to family or friends, please share it with them. Check out the show notes for the link to Mary's website, marythompsonayurveda.com. In the show notes, you'll also find the link to that Daily Habits for Holistic Health program I mentioned earlier, where I really focus on the mental gunas and on maintaining positive mental health and promoting more sattva in your life. So check out that link to the 28-day self-paced online program. You'll also find my other online services there, online consultations, at-home cleanses, and there's a free 15-minute Services Enquiry Call if you want to hop on Zoom with me and I can answer some of your questions before booking. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe or follow the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you would like to leave a rating and review, I would really appreciate it. Therefore, more people can find this wisdom of Ayurveda. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.